Are you tired of the secular news? Do you want a Christian view of politics? Do you want to know what is going on in your Christian community? Your wait is over. Welcome to the InterMountain Christian News Hour. Here is your host, Dr. Anthony Harper.
I'm Dr. Anthony Harper here with the InterMountain Christian News Hour, an outreach of the InterMountain Christian newspaper, and very excited to be here in Jerusalem. We encourage people to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for all Israel leaders and all Israel citizens here. It's very important to support Israel. We know from Scripture, those that bless Israel will be blessed, and those that curse Israel will be cursed. And I am blessed today, like I said, to be here in Jerusalem. A lot of great events here, and was earlier today at the Temple Sifting Project. I mean the Mount Sifting Project, and learned a lot there. And today, right now, I am with Rabbi. Is it Richman? I'm sorry, Richman, and with Temple Institute.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so I'd like for you to share with our listeners just a little bit of brief history of the Temple Institute and your concerns about what has been going on the Temple Mount and the current status of the Temple Mount regarding the excavation and all that. So starting out with just a brief history of the Temple Institute and a website that you might have.
The Temple Institute is a very unique educational nonprofit organization that was founded already about 28 years ago. Its goal is basically to be dedicated to the rebuilding of the Holy Temple, as we find the divine commandment in Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8, and they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among you. And the goal of the Temple Institute is to be as actively engaged as possible with God's commandment to rebuild the temple. So we go about that through a number of ways. We have an organization that produces educational materials and curriculum and teaches all over the world about the relevancy of the Holy Temple and the command to rebuild it and the central role that the Holy Temple occupies in the life not only of Israel, but according to every prophet of Israel, how it is integral for the spiritual rectification of all mankind. So we operate a headquarters in the old city of Jerusalem where, amongst other activities, we are actually creating the vessels, the sacred vessels that are to be used in the service of the Holy Temple. So one can see there the priestly garments, the golden menorah, the table of the showbread, the golden incense altar, and many of the implements and musical instruments of the Levites that are used in the Holy Temple service. These things are not museum pieces or replicas, but they're actually made according to biblical law from the original source materials, the original dimensions, so that they can actually be used in the temple. They are kosher, as it were, according to biblical law, and this is a very phenomenal project because it's the first time they can be seen for 2,000 years, and this is actually like the first step of the rebuilding of the temple. All this because of the fact that the Jewish people are not only commanded to build the Holy Temple, but the Holy Temple is described again by every prophet of Israel as the thing that brings about the restoration of the relationship between God and all mankind. One has to very simply look at the verses in Isaiah that tells us that the entire world will stream to the Holy Temple and that it will once again become a house of prayer for all nations. So that's our goal. The temple, you ask about the Temple Mount. The temple goes on the Temple Mount and not, for example, in Washington, D.C., just to throw that out as an example.
I get the humor because when President Obama was here earlier, it seemed like people were promoting him as some type of messiah figure and think that the White House is somehow, but I agree, only the true temple is the true temple here in Jerusalem.
Right, and I'll let everything pass regarding the false Messiah.
Okay.
But in any event, the fact is, this is the one place on earth that was chosen by God. It is the center of creation, Mount Moriah. It is the place about which the Bible refers to tens of times as the place that I will show you, the place that I will choose. It was the location of the first and second temples, and again, every prophet of Israel tells us that the third temple is going to be rebuilt and will herald an unparalleled period of peace in human history. So, what is going on in the Temple Mount today? Again, this is the place where the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is to once again rest. This is the place which is really the portal of the relationship between man and God. It is, in that way, in that respect, the only holy place in the world, really. So the irony is that the Temple Mount, which is really the only place in the world, for example, where Israel is commanded to pray, is the only place in the world where Jews, and for that matter Christians as well, are not allowed to pray on pain of arrest. This is a very great irony, and it is based on a fictitious state of being, state of affairs, which is referred to as the status quo, which is an apparatus by which Muslims are permitted to pray, but non-Muslims are not permitted to pray or demonstrate any religious sentiment or feeling there. Now, this is actually not legal, not democratic, and against, of course, human rights, and the government of Israel agrees with that, and the High Court of Justice has upheld tens of times really, the right of all people to be able to pray at this place, and the police are actually instructed by the courts to facilitate non-Muslim prayer at the Temple Mount. However, there is something between the lines that's going on the level perhaps of between governments and between on a diplomatic level. There is a certain kind of interference by the Kingdom of Jordan, and there is an element, a group called the Waqf, which is the Muslim trust that day to day governs over affairs at the Temple Mount, which is actually controlled by Jordan and was given over the stewardship, as it were, of the Temple Mount, and unfortunately the government of Israel facilitates this through the police that are basically either instructed or empowered to prevent all non-Muslim prayer at the Temple Mount. So one of our key battles, as it were, is to fight for the rights of all people to be able to pray at the Temple Mount, which really is pretty much obviously a prerequisite and a forerunner of the whole concept of the rebuilding of the temple. This is the place of peace. This is the place of prayer. So obviously it's difficult to talk about rebuilding the Holy Temple when we can't even pray in this place. And that prayer is very, very important, and obviously an act of ultimate peace. To be able to express oneself to one's Creator is, I think, the most basic human rights, reflecting the dignity of man being created in the divine image. So it's very, very frustrating and ironic that at this place, which is our only holy place, we are prevented from praying. In addition to the fact that we're prevented from praying, there's a tremendous amount of aggression that is displayed, and that is and with which Jewish and sometimes non-Jewish visitors, but Christian visitors, are confronted by tremendous Muslim aggression at the Temple Mount. It's come to light in recent months that there are groups on the Temple Mount of Muslim agitators that literally receive a monthly stipend from Hamas, the terrorist organization, just to stay there and try to intimidate the Jewish visitors. and so on and so forth. So the situation is very, very convoluted, and this is a major concern of ours. In addition to another thing that you, Reverend, alluded to in your preface, which is the ongoing deliberate destruction by the forces of Islam of artifacts and remnants of Jewish history. The two holy temples remnants have been systematically destroyed subterraneously from the Temple Mount. You mentioned the Temple Mount Sifting Project. This is the result of the fact that hundreds of thousands of tons of debris were removed from the Temple Mount without any archaeological supervision as part of an effort that is waged by Islam to utterly destroy the evidence that this is a Jewish place, and it's part of the final, what they call the final status negotiations of Jerusalem, wherein the goal of Islam is basically to be able to make this preposterous statement that Jerusalem is a 7,000-year-old Arab city.
Well, what about that is there's been a lot of actually anger about this issue. I think about a lot of Christian leaders in America thinking about how could the Israel leaders let this Waqf get away with this? What led up to this? I know there are Arab members in the Knesset, and I'm wondering what part they had to play in support of the Waqf. I guess that's what you pronounce it. But for them doing this actually criminal activity, and somehow Israel leaders let them get away with. Any thoughts on that?
No, it's got really nothing to do with the Arab presence in the Knesset. What it has to do with is, like I say, a very kind of odd configuration wherein, unfortunately, I guess because of highly placed diplomatic concerns, Israel feels that it has to turn a certain blind eye to this criminal activity. This is my own speculation. I think it's been fairly substantiated as of late by news releases. The idea is that Israel, in many ways, supports Jordan. If you study the history of Jordan, you'll find that it is a fabricated and fictitious kingdom. It would not be able to exist and flourish were it not for Israel's support in many ways, scientifically, economically, agriculturally. Why would that be so important to Israel? And in Jordan, in the meantime, takes every opportunity to denigrate, castigate, and accuse Israel of all sorts of things. But you see, there's also the threat of ISIS, and there's the threat of unrest coming from beyond Jordan. I think it's in Israel's interest to keep the borders secure and to keep Jordan stable. This is my own speculation as to why Israel would allow this kind of activity on the Temple Mount. Unfortunately, there is a great lack of supervision here. It is not only the holiest place for the Jewish people, but it is, archaeologically speaking, the most important location as well. And unfortunately, there is, like I said, just a blind eye towards all of this, and many academics and scholars and secular professionals in the field of, for example, archaeology are really quite angry and up in arms about this abuse. We've been working towards trying to understand where this is coming from and why for many, many years, and occasionally there is some sort of new understanding as to where it's all coming from. But the long and the short of it is that the Temple Mount issue is considered to be a very volatile security-related issue, and the portfolio, as it were, of responsibility of the Temple Mount is only in the hands of the Prime Minister, and he basically makes all of these decisions, so that even if the High Court of Justice declares that the Jewish people have to be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, the day after that declaration, the police will still disallow it because they have orders from some higher authority. So there's something very funny looking here. In the meantime, I also have to relate, though, this is very, very important, that this is changing because there is a tremendous public awareness now and a tremendous movement of change. with Israel really beginning to collectively return, as it were, to the Temple Mount, and there are many more Jews that are active in this area now, that are visiting the Temple Mount, that are attempting to pray on the Temple Mount. There are many members of Knesset, for example, that have made this into a vocal and important issue. And it even was featured in the recent election campaigns, with those for and against as being an important factor in determining who one would want to vote for. So that is very, very positive, and we do see and feel, and we really can measure a tremendous change in consciousness, and that is a blessing and shows that the time really is changing, and there is a huge effort being made now by a younger, more vibrant generation to right the wrongs of the past few decades and to reconnect with the Temple Mount.
Well, regarding the Temple Mount and prayers there, some people would say Jewish people are maybe cautious about approaching that Temple Mount area, going up there to pray. What in general would Jewish people feel about being right on the top of the Temple Mount and prayers there?
Well, what you're referring to really is a complicated subject. The fact is that the Temple Mount is a very large area. When I say the Temple Mount, when I use that expression, I'm referring to the entire Herodian expansion, which is just a bit under 37 acres.
Oh.
However, the actual sanctified courtyard of the Holy Temple, regarding which there is a biblical prohibition from treading in a state of impurity, it's much smaller. It's about a fifth of that size. So there were different additions. Now, the scholars are a kind of in some sort of debate about exactly where the sanctified environs are. So when you hear Jewish people expressing a position that they don't want to go there at all, that they're afraid to go there, that one shouldn't go there, that's coming from this kind of confused state, which is again a product maybe of the exile experience, the fact that we weren't in touch with some of these sources. So they're saying, well, we have to just avoid the whole issue. But that really is a result of ignorance. Where we go, I mean, it's a lifetime of study. It is a very, very exact and specific course of study, but where those temple enthusiasts go to pray, there's no question about it that they are not treading on the sacred environs. We go along a path which was approved by many great Jewish luminaries and scholars throughout the millennia. And this is well documented and well researched. And also, this is the expression of two different schools of thought or two different attitudes. There is a school of thought which is kind of like, well, just leave everything alone. God will take care of everything, and it will just work its way out. But we, if I may say, speaking for the Temple Institute, and I believe for the generation that is, as it were, retaking the Temple Mount, we eschew that philosophy, and we believe that the Jewish experience, the experience of being committed to the God of Israel, the Torah that He's given us, the divine commandments, they're all about action. They're all about doing. They're not about waiting for God to do something. God commands us to do, not to wait for Him. He's waiting for us. Yes. And so our goal here is to responsibly and reverently be present on the Temple Mount, to stop the erosion of Jewish history, to stop the deliberate and wanton destruction of Jewish history, to cauterize the almost satanic attempt to Islamicize Jewish existence, history, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, Israel, the world. That's what this is all about. It's not about radical Islam. It's about Islam. And unfortunately, that's not the politically correct thing to say. I understand. We're not supposed to say that. Americans don't say that. That they get their cue from the highest office of the land. But this is about Islam, and what we're up against here is an effort to basically smother any other religious expression or entity. And that really is the avowed goal of Islam as well, which you can see all over the world. So how goes the Temple Mount is how goes the whole world. And therefore, the struggle of the Jewish people to pray on the Temple Mount is really the struggle for humanity to assert itself and to reclaim the divine image. And therefore, I think it's important for your listeners and viewers and readers to know that Israel is fighting, sometimes alone, a very bold and courageous struggle for a true freedom. And that's why Israel has to be supported and understood and advocated, because the only thing standing between the way of life that Americans cherish and the gaping abyss of absolute destruction is the state of Israel. That's what our battle is all about.
Yeah, it's really a serious concern. A lot of Christian leaders in America, like I said earlier, that are praying, for the peace of Jerusalem, for Israel, and it's a very serious issue. And they see it that the survival of Israel is key. I'm thankful that Prime Minister Netanyahu won this election in a sense because he was the candidate. A lot of Christian leaders were supporting him. That he would be more likely to support Israel as far as the security and not agree to the two-state solution. And there was some news that came out here in Israel that just before the election that he was not for a two-state solution, and I would believe that his perspective is that will not bring peace. Actually, that a lot of Christian leaders believe that there'll be more terrorism if we give away more land. And I want to say that specifically the Christian leaders in America have a verse, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, you know that very well. And they believe the solution to terrorism is found in that verse of what Solomon learned, and that the concept is repentance for all of us, for our nations. Any thoughts on that?
I really couldn't agree more. I'm not a politician and therefore not going to comment on the political level, but on the level of Torah and of our covenant with God. The two-state solution is a heinous, idolatrous obscenity, because the land doesn't belong to us, it belongs to the God of Israel, was bequeathed into the stewardship of the children of Israel. And the whole concept of the two-state solution is basically just some sort of rewrite of history, and it could only lead to death and destruction, as has every attempt to somehow appease the murderous hordes of Arab terrorists. Every attempt to appease them by giving them land has so far only resulted in more death and destruction. And the whole concept and expression of the two-state solution, again, just leaving aside the political realm for a moment, it's a sin against God, because it is the land that was given over to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the tribes of Israel. And I don't think that he changed his mind. I don't think we need the President of the United States' permission, and I don't think we owe anyone an apology. So either we, as you quoted that verse, we are in our land, living according to the word of the God of Israel, and upholding that part of the deal, our covenant. That would bring about a state of excellence, not only for the people of Israel, but for the world. In fact, the word Zion, which is a reference not only to a particular geographical location, but to the whole concept of Israel living in her land, Zion comes from a Hebrew word which literally means excellence. And the concept of Zion is that when Israel is living in her land, according to the Word of God, that brings about an influx of blessing for the entire world, for all the nations.
It does. And, I wanted to mention there are some rabbis in America. I don't know if you've heard of the Rabbinical Alliance of America, but these rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, believe that that scripture, 2 Chronicles 7:14, specifically turning from wickedness, from the wicked ways, is the key component for Israel in protection from terrorism. And they identified the wicked ways of dividing the land and also killing children and abortion and the expression homosexuality. And they believe Israel is being desecrated. The Holy Land is being desecrated by these wicked ways. And but how likely is it for the Israel leadership to ban those things as the great kings of Israel used to do?
Again, I think in conclusion we have to realize that the people of Israel have been through a great deal in the past 2,000 years, and what we're witnessing on a daily level in the state of Israel is much more than just the resurrection of a people. It's a divine process that will ultimately, because this is God's promise, will ultimately lead to the redemption of all humanity. There is a very great spiritual revolution going on in Israel that is palpable, that's felt every day. It's the background of everything that's going on. It's the background of the elections. And so all the things that you're referring to are part of the spiritual battle and the choices that are being made by the people of Israel, and part of the massive movement of return to our own selves, to our identity, to who we are. And thankfully and blessedly, that is exactly what is going on here. And so that's the only way to understand what's going on in contemporary Israel, is to understand that it is a spiritual battle that's going on within the fabric of the nation to determine what our destiny will be. And I am very, very positive, not only hopeful, but positive that we are making the right decisions, the right choices. And I think that the role here of your constituency that cares so much about Israel and wants to bless Israel is to be first and foremost good advocates of the state of Israel, and not to allow the abuse and the anti-Semitism and the falsehoods and fabrications that are foisted upon the state of Israel daily by the media and even by the government. It's important for them to stand up and be counted and be vocal. And of course, it's important for them to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for Israel. And most of all, it's important for them to understand that what is going on here will affect each and every one of them, because the fate of Israel, as I say, is the fate of the entire world. And this is ultimately the battle between good and evil that's being fought out here. And the promises that are made by God regarding the ultimate unification of all mankind and the rebuilding of the temple and the new level of living and awareness, as Isaiah says, that the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the water of the sea, and all people will be united. That's what the Holy Temple is all about, and that's what our goal is. And so it's really there's a lot at stake here. And this is exactly what we are all about.
About the temple, the rebuilding of the temple. A lot of people have concern about when that might take place. Is there in the scriptures? I know we need to. We're actually coming here short, but that would be, I think, for a later time, is to know when this might happen. I know that you've got a lot of things made for that, but I wanted to remind.
I can address that now, if you like.
Would you like to address that briefly?
When it will be rebuilt?
Yes.
We are behind schedule about 2,000 years. There is no waiting necessitated. We're not waiting for any sign or wonder. We are obligated to build it now, and there are no obstacles to building it other than the collective will and decisiveness of the people of Israel. And when we are ready to accept upon ourselves that obligation and responsibility and destiny, then the people of Israel united will build the temple. But I wouldn't wait for anything dramatic. I wouldn't wait for banner headlines. I wouldn't wait for World War III. I wouldn't encourage your people to look out the window and expect to see Armageddon, because, again, this is very, very simple. It's about having the fortitude to do the right thing, and it's not mystical. And this is exactly what we're leading up to. This is what Jewish history is leading up to. And anyone who sees what the Jewish people have been through in the past 1,550, 25, and 5 years, whether they like it or not, they have to admit something is definitely going on here, because there is a God in the world, and that same God who brought us out of Egypt and who has kept us alive and kept us close to Him all of these years. He hasn't changed His mind, and I believe that Israel hasn't changed her mind, and I think that we're witnessing now on a daily level progress that's bringing us every day closer to the rebuilding of the Holy Temple, which will come about when the Jewish people have had enough of the falsehood of the promises that are made by governments and the false promises that they've been raised on. And I think when they realize that they have the ability to bring this about, they will.
Well, a lot of people are looking forward to that moment when the temple will be here. And, I want for people to learn more about your institute, so they can go to your website, www.templeinstitute.org. And once again, I'm speaking with Rabbi Richman here at the Temple Institute, and I thank you for Rabbi Richman for joining me today. And I do pray for the peace of Jerusalem and Israel, and for all those to continue to pray for Israel. Thank you, Rabbi Richman.
Shalom, and wishing everyone blessings from Jerusalem.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Anthony Harper here with the InterMountain Christian News Hour, an outreach of the InterMountain Christian newspaper, making a difference. And we need your support of good news. Check out our website at IMCNH03192015, where you can download our newspaper and make your tax-deductible donation to support our voice, our Christian concerns at the White House and in Israel and other places. Do go online to make your donation and to support this important news ministry, the only evangelical Christian newspaper of its kind, a grassroots newspaper in our Intermountain regions, spanning from Colorado over to Reno, Nevada. And we currently have needs to cover our travel expenses for White House and Israel trips. And also, we need a donated minivan, a vehicle, a good condition, low mileage, air conditioning, and automatic transmission for delivery of our newspapers and other news events that we go to cover, representing Christian concerns. So please make your donation, tax-deductible, online at imcnews.org, just by clicking on the donate banner ad that you see there. Thank you for your support of our good newspaper and for your prayers, most importantly, that we can continue to be a voice of truth for Christians in our Intermountain region, for the glory of God.
We read news every day, news that's informative but rarely encouraging. The InterMountain Christian newspaper aims to change that. They present the news you need to know, from what's going on in your community to your world, with encouraging words, motivation, and the resources you need to make positive changes in your life. What is your local government doing that you need to know about? What's happening in your community you need to be a part of? Whether it's a story from your neighborhood, a national story, or an encouraging word, you'll find biblical issues of everyday life in the InterMountain Christian newspaper. InterMountain Christian News is produced and supported by the work and donations of individuals and churches. You'll find it at churches, Christian bookstores, by subscription, and online at imcnews.org. To find out more about supporting this local resource, go online at imcnews.org or call InterMountain Christian News in Boise, Idaho at 208-703-8688. The InterMountain Christian News, a voice sharing the truth on matters dear to people's hearts.